530.
Good evening, I'm Steve Hensley. The Democratic and Republican running mates are hitting the battleground states after last night's first and only vice presidential debate of the campaign. CBS's Bradley Blackburn reports from New York.
The next vice president of the United States.
Ohio Republican Senator J.D. Vance is targeting the battleground state of Michigan with two stops. First, talking manufacturing in Auburn Hills.
Donald Trump and I believe that one of the biggest mistakes our leaders made is that they decided over 40 years that we didn't need to make our own stuff anymore.
Minnesota Democratic Governor Tim Walz headed to another battleground state, Pennsylvania, for a rally with Senator John Fetterman in York. The campaign says his Pennsylvania bus tour is the start of a cross-country travel and fundraising blitz. Vice President Kamala Harris headed to Georgia for a briefing about recovery efforts after Hurricane Helene and to survey the damage.
You know, I've been reading and hearing about the work you've been doing over the last few days, and I think it really does represent some of the best of what we each know can be done, especially when we coordinate around local, state, and federal resources.
Both campaigns praised the performance of their candidates at last night's vice presidential debate here at the CBS Broadcast Center in New York. The Trump campaign called Vance dominant, while the Harris campaign said Walz was strong. The campaign is already releasing an ad highlighting one of the key moments from the debate.
Did he lose the 2020 election?
Tim, I'm focused on the future.
That is a damning non-answer.
It is disqualifying to not acknowledge that the 2020 election was won by Joe Biden. It's as simple as that.
Former President Donald Trump is trying to spin the debate into campaign dollars, spending his day fundraising in Texas. Bradley Blackburn, CBS News, New York.
The Harris campaign says Walz will also be taking part in more national and local media interviews this week. Vice presidential candidates Tim Walz and J.D. Vance, of course, faced off last night, and more than 500 registered voters who watched were polled after the debate, according to a CNN instant poll of debate watchers conducted by SSRS. The debate watchers were divided over which candidate did the better job. 51% said Vance won the debate, 49% said Walz won. A new Department of Homeland Security report warns the U.S. threat environment remains high ahead of the election and amid the conflict in the Middle East. The annual assessment released Wednesday warns of possible threats from violent extremists driven by the heated political environment in the U.S. The assessment also mentions foreign and domestic threats from terrorist groups and others inspired by conflicts abroad. Two former Louisville police officers involved in the Breonna Taylor raid have been indicted again. The superseding indictment comes after a judge dismissed charges against former Detective Joshua Janes and Sergeant Kyle Meany in August. The new federal indictment expands on evidence and includes additional claims. Janes and Meany are accused of knowingly using false information and omitting details to get a search warrant for Taylor's apartment. One of the doctors charged in connection with Matthew Perry's death has pleaded guilty. Dr. Mark Chavez entered the plea in federal court in Los Angeles, becoming the third person to admit guilt in the aftermath of Perry's death last year. Prosecutors offered him lesser charges so he would cooperate as they go after two people they deem more responsible for the actor's death. Chavez is free on bond after turning over his passport and surrendering his medical license. New York Mayor Eric Adams could have additional charges added to his federal corruption case. During a hearing today, the prosecutor said investigators have evidence Adams reportedly tried to tamper with a witness, calling it a significant instance of witness interference. Although the judge said he would not set a trial date yet, Adams' attorney indicated the defense team hoped to have the trial completed by March due to the timeline for next year's mayoral race.
What a difference 1 hour makes. Remember the last hour we were talking about how Buffalo Mountain you couldn't see anything on the tower cam, and here's the latest right now. We're getting a break in that low-lying visibility in the low clouds. You can see a few peaks of sunshine as well. And temperatures right now are still in the low to mid 60s from Pikeville to Jackson down to Hazard, 70s from Irvin to Somerset down to Monticello. Williamsburg is at 68, 73 is the current temperature in Middlesboro as well as Harlan. All is quiet right now on the satellite and radar. We have a clean sweep across eastern Kentucky in the next 12 hours. Keeps us mainly clear as we go throughout the evening into the overnight hours. The fog, though, that's going to be the main contender as we go throughout the overnight hours into the first part of your Thursday morning. And Thursday morning when you wake up, we'll see temperatures in the low to mid 50s, upper 50s towards Hazard, 53 Monticello, 53 Somerset, 57 in Jacksboro. Now coming up in the first alert forecast, we'll talk about temperatures going to the upper 70s and low 80s, but they're not going to last. Details in a few minutes. Steve?
Eric, thank you. The death toll continues to increase following last week's hurricane. At least 178 people have died as a result of the catastrophic flooding. President Biden visited both North Carolina and South Carolina today. More than 1,000 troops are deployed to assist with response and recovery efforts. Earlier this week, President Biden said approximately 600 people remained unaccounted for. With folks in several states still being impacted by Helene, some members of the Lexington Fire Department are lending a hand. Originally, 3 firefighters were called to Florida as part of Ohio Task Force 1, an urban search and rescue team pulling people from parts of Ohio, Indiana, and Kentucky. But in the aftermath of the storm, the 3 firefighters have been relocated to North Carolina.
They're out doing damage assessment and then wide area search, looking for people that might still be trapped, whether it's in buildings that have collapsed or, as we know in North Carolina, a lot of the buildings are just completely gone. They're non-existent. Whole towns have been washed away.
The Salvation Army Emergency Disaster Service teams are also helping people affected by Helene. Donations will go towards food, water, and long-term recovery services for survivors. Some people are still without power here in Kentucky. Clark Energy says they are still working to restore power to more than 300 members, which includes folks in Menifee, Morgan, Estill, and Powell counties. That number was once at 16,000 members without power. They also said they had more than 80 broken poles at one point. Coming up on Mountain News.